Welcome, everybody. Today's guest is Eleanor McManus, who is the co-founder and partner of the communications firm Trident DMG and of the law firm Galper Goldberg. A former award-winning journalist at CNN for over 10 years, Eleanor has over 2 decades of experience providing clients with strategic counsel for internal and external communications, media relations, reputation and crisis management, issue mitigation, and litigation communications. Eleanor has been named to Lawdragon's Global 100 Leaders in Legal Strategy and Consulting for crisis communications from 2019 to 2023 as an industry innovator by PR News Top Women in PR Awards in 2021. Business Insider named Eleanor to its list of top public relations experts, CEOs to hire in a crisis in 2021. Eleanor has counseled a wide variety of clients, including high profile individuals, celebrities, athletes, Fortune 500 companies, among many others. She has also counseled many women during the Me Too movement, helping them tell their stories. Eleanor began her career in 1999 as a booker at CNN, where she worked for over a decade at the cable news channel's then highest rated program, Larry King Live. She rose to become a senior producer and was responsible for planning, booking, and producing exclusive interviews with iconic newsmakers and well known politicians, including Presidents Obama, Clinton, and Ford, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, every presidential candidate in both 2004 and 2008, and foreign leaders such as Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev and Vladimir Putin, among many others. She's also helped to cover historic events, including the September 11th attacks, Hurricane Katrina, the passing of President Ford and Reagan, President Obama inauguration, and the earthquake in Haiti. Eleanor received Emmy and Edward Murrow Awards for September 11th coverage and 2005 DuPont Award for coverage of the tsunami disaster in South Asia, among many others. Eleanor co-founded Press Forward, an independent group that works to create a safe work environment and alleviates the status of women in the newsroom. With that, Eleanor, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You have such an extraordinary career. Like, you've done so many great things, and now you're co-founder of two very successful and high-profile companies. But let's take a step back to your time at Larry King Live. Can you share your experience? What was it like to work on the show?
So it was an incredible experience. I started at CNN when I was 22 years old. I was asked to answer. I answered phone calls, very entry level, open mail, and I got to really be there just during these great interviews. It was the number one show at the time, and we were, competing for interviews with Katie Couric, Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, and it was just an incredible time to be. I would say sometimes you're just really at the right place at the right time. I would come in every day early and stay late. And, sometimes, a lot of times it's just like being able to raise your hand. And, every time they needed something or needed someone to do anything, nothing was ever too little. And I think I was able to get opportunities because I was able to always be there. And sometimes it's just a matter of like being there on a weekend where someone else isn't there and you get an opportunity to go on a client or to go work on a specific story. And it was just incredible to be there working on these great stories with just incredible, brilliant colleagues.
We're responsible for booking so many high profile people. Like, how did you manage that, especially if we talk about foreign leaders like Vladimir Putin? Like, he is not the person who would just give interviews to foreign outlets. How did you manage that?
Well, look, I mean, the way a lot of this stuff works, it's you're not going to them directly. So I wasn't speaking to Vladimir Putin. I was, I speak to his people. Everyone's got folks usually. And look, a lot of it's just not being afraid, right? Picking up the phone, this making a phone call, asking, telling them, not being afraid to like speak with them. Just be, sometimes you're talking to an assistant. Sometimes you get the direct number of someone. And sometimes it's just like, I said, like, sometimes a lot of it is just making sure that you're not afraid to talk to that person or call that person. I remember a story. I'll give you a couple stories, but I remember there was some huge story that happened on a Friday night. I was back home. I remember being at a park that night, and there was a huge story. Our show went on at 9 o'clock, and they said to me, "You have to call Tom Brokaw. Call Tom Brokaw." And after hours, Tom Brokaw's assistant isn't answering, right? And we happened to have his cell phone, and I'm like 26 years old, and I had no problem. I just called Tom Brokaw's cell phone, said, "Hey, we're doing the show. Something happened. We'd love you to be on." And the guy was so nice, such a gentleman. He said, "Absolutely, I would love to be on." And we made it happen. And it was just never being afraid to call, never reaching out to everyone, and really making them feel comfortable that if they tell their story unedited and live, they would have a great place to be. And look, I had a great host as well. With regards to foreign leaders, it helped that I spoke a foreign language. I spoke Russian, and I speak Russian fluently. And I remember the interview actually, one of the things I remember really well, which is a great story, is when I got Gorbachev. It was the week that President Reagan passed away, and everyone wanted, President Gorbachev. I was able to connect with his assistant, and his assistant said to me in Russian, I spoke to him in Russian. His assistant said to me, "Look, we are getting on a plane to Houston. If you can meet me at dinner with President Gorbachev, tonight in Houston, maybe he'll do the interview." And I just got on a plane, went to the place they went up to the place that they were eating dinners, and I said, "Look, you promised me that if I showed up, you would do the interview, you would do my show," and they did it. And sometimes just connecting with people, having giving them opportunities and connecting with people in the right way matters.
I can definitely relate to that because through my career, I would always be proactive, like calling people, emailing, trying to get connected. And then at the end, like people would ask me like, "Oh, how do you know those people?" Because like I never afraid to take that step. Maybe
Yep.
it will lead to nothing, but I think like many people will be surprised how helpful others and willing to help are. Like it's just take this step and see what happens.
Yeah,
Oh, this is
absolutely.
incredible. And you represent now as a co-founder of Trident DMG, like so many clients, especially in crisis management. Do you have like a framework you follow when dealing with the crisis? How do you manage it?
So, crisis clients are really, I think, sometimes the most interesting. They're really intense, it's high stakes, and you're dealing with people at the top, at the probably the worst and the lowest part of their lives. And so, I mean, the framework that we manage is really apologize and acknowledge. Sometimes it's usually if they're in a crisis, they've done something wrong, but that's not always all the stuff that's being reported, right? So that's why you want to communicate. So we always say apologize and acknowledge, communicate transparently to all stakeholders, make sure your message is consistent, and then we rebuild trust. And that's kind of like the framework we follow, and everything. And look, we have times you tell them this is the right thing to do, and not every client listens, right? And then at some point, you can only do your best and tell them, here's what we suggest that you should do to help you get out of this. And hopefully they trust you enough that you can get them out of this.
Do you think in terms of crisis, like those executives, companies, they always have to issue like a statement when something happened. Like, for instance, I don't know, I think it was on Monday, Asia CEO posted him half naked on LinkedIn taking a board meeting or a management meeting, and masseuse was behind him rubbing his shoulders. And on LinkedIn, he literally said, like, well, I'm so glad to be part of this culture at AirAsia, and just having an opportunity to do those things at the same time, having a massage and having a work meeting. But then obviously there is a backlash, like it's not a safe environment, especially for women. And what I know, they took down the LinkedIn post, but there is no statements, nothing. Would you suggest them to issue a
So,
statement?
so issue a statement by him or by the company in response to what happened?
I think by the company, probably, because I would assume internally it would raise a lot of questions as well, right? When the
Yeah. So
CEO
look,
posts something like this.
social media is such an interesting tool. I never dealt with social media 20 years ago, and now you can be your best friend or your worst enemy. And I've seen social media take so many people down. First, you have to address the fact that this gentleman, posted a picture of him with a massage person. And not only the fact that he posted it, the fact that he was happy to show people that this is happening. This is an executive who has the opportunity to him during work hours to get a massage when many employees don't are trying to work to feed their families, are trying to get commutes home to be there on time, and don't have opportunities to have a massage in the office, right? It's just stupid, and it was dumb for him to do. It was smart that he finally took it down, but to me, this is something that the company should have him apologize. I mean, the company can do something on its own, put out a statement. To me, the company should force him to say this was something really dumb and stupid, and I regret my actions. I think the company should have him do it.
And I feel like in terms of crisis, a lot of the work that we do is about controlling and shaping the narrative when facing negative media coverage. What's your approach to that? How you handle it?
You mean, how do you control the narrative?
Yeah, when already like all this negative backlash from
Yes.
stakeholders, media, what do you do?
Well, number one, I always say communicate, 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 right? Don't shut down, don't hide. You know, always you want to acknowledge what happened, acknowledge the crisis, communicate your commitment to addressing it as soon as possible, and then empathize and apologize. Empathize with what happened and apologize if needed. You'd be so surprised how far an apology will get. And not an apology that says, I apologize, but just an apology and a full stop apology, showing empathy, and you'll be surprised how forgiving and understanding that people will be. You also want to highlight at the end of that saying so positive actions that you're doing in light of what happened. May also mean getting some third party support. And really, at the end of the day, it really requires having consistent, transparent, honest communication, basically a genuine commitment to addressing the issues at heart of the negative coverage. And then finally, then you get to rebuilding trust and credibility. But that takes time and does not happen overnight. And, you just got to be persistent and patient in the efforts to really shape a more positive narrative.
Sometimes I feel that it's not easy to persuade leadership executives to take responsibility. They always want to like, let's wait and see what will happen tomorrow.
Correct. And that never works. I think waiting and not doing waiting too long to do something and causes a delayed response, and failing to respond promptly often that exacerbates a crisis.
I couldn't agree more with this. And then like you usually tell them, see, if you would address it yesterday, maybe today we wouldn't have all those additional like inbounds and problems and questions from investors. I know that you also train a lot of executives with media preparation, like for interviews, for any like public appearances. What would you say the most common ask from them when they need your support with media training? What are they struggling with?
So what are they struggling? So interesting with their so media training, I think, is one of the most fun parts of what I get to do, right? It's essential, obviously, because to handle a crisis effectively, executives need to learn how to respond to the crisis and control the narrative, and that ultimately helps protect the organization's reputation. I love it when I get folks who listen and internalize what we show them. Not everyone does that, but it's always really great, and a lot of times they're very, very um, happy to be part of this. Um, you know, I remember I have a CEO who I've trained many, many years ago, and he still reaches out to me when he does an interview and asks for my approval. And he still says to me, look, I've learned, you know, everything I've learned was taught by you. And I mean, things like that are incredibly, incredibly rewarding. I think in response to your question, I think some of the things that are most challenging is in media training is when you're showing them how to answer tough questions, right? It's just about sounding confident and being composed, and you're showing them how to, there may be hostile questions as well, and that it's the way they come about and respond to hostile questions, which is the difference between a good interview and a bad interview. We say them stay calm under pressure, and that's not always easy to teach, right? Especially when you're being attacked and when an interview becomes hostile. It's teaching how to respond to a hostile journalist, redirect the conversation in a constructive manner. But when sometimes people are being attacked, they're not always able to do that. And I think that's probably the most challenging thing to train someone to do, is not to let their emotion get in the way and to answer and redirect.
So interesting. Like for instance, a client in a situation when they being attacked by an interviewer and they responded maybe not in a professional way, showing their personality, their emotions. What happens next? Like, does it mean that you lost the control of the narrative, you will have a crisis in hand, or you still can do something to mitigate any negative publicity or like feedback around an interview?
So it happens, right? It happens where you're handling a crisis. You tell the client, you tell the executive that the best thing to do is to go on and talk to a reporter, and the interview goes bad, right? And that happens all the time. There's ways to get out of that. It's never easy. Usually, once you dig a hole like that, you're gonna keep digging. And there's things that you can do to change that. You can do another interview, do a better interview. But usually, what that means to me is that that person was not prepared. If that person goes on an interview and does not do a good job, they were not prepared in the best way, because preparation should have avoided all that.
Actually, like so many people are surprised when I tell them that, all those CEOs, high profile executives, when they do those interviews, they actually have people who help them with their messaging, how to respond to those questions, their body language,
Yeah.
even what would be better, what would be best to wear for a specific interview. And everyone is like, oh, we thought that they were born this way, they're natural. I'm like, no, they also like, they take time, it takes practice, it takes very smart and strategic people around you to help you. It's not like it's given. You actually have to work for it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of preparation and how to do an interview the right way. And it's not something that everybody can also do. And it's not always teachable to everyone either.
Especially when you're facing a crisis, it's like it's a very stressful place to be in. It's definitely very high-paced, demanding environment, and you do a lot of work in this field. Do you have any techniques you use to help yourself to stay focused, grounded, and centered when you represent those clients? Because I can imagine it can be very challenging, especially when you're managing a few clients at a time.
It is. Managing PR crises is very high stakes. It's very complex, and I love the adrenaline rush in it. It's not for everyone. I think my background working at a 24-hour news station like CNN is really what helps me being able to do this type of work, um, and stay calm in a crisis, right? A lot of times you're dealing with things where a client is having a meltdown, just like I used to deal with news at CNN when there's news stories that are breaking news, right? When news is breaking, the best things that you can do is stay calm, right? Getting stressed and anxious does never help the situation, doesn't help you help with the client, and that never helps. But I think the most important thing, because you're dealing with like a lot of moving parts, a lot of emotions, and a lot of people have a lot on the line. And I think one of the most important things I think is really to prioritize is self-care, right? It's really crucial when you're working in any high stress field like crisis management. That means just getting enough sleep, eating healthily, exercising, being able to relax. And one other thing is being able to put it away when you go home. It's not everyone always has that opportunities, and I've been on many late night calls and early morning calls, midnight calls. But when you go home, you try not to let it seep into you. And compartmentalizing, I think, is really, really important. So you don't let it seep into your bones and affect you mentally and emotionally. And that can happen very, very much with a lot of people. And I think in my younger days, I would let that happen and get really close to the story. And I don't think that's good for you mentally. The other thing I think is really important in this is being able to have colleagues that you work with, that you admire, that you can exchange ideas with, and that you learn from. Because sometimes, you're not sure what to do. We don't always have the answers. And having people who you can trust, who you work with, and have a great exchange of ideas is really, really important.
I'm just curious, have you ever had a mentor when you transitioned to strategic communications, crisis management, or someone you would admire how they handle their work and represent clients?
Yes, I do. I won't name the person.
Okay.
I have someone very much who's a mentor of mine, and I would not be here today without that person. Um, you know, Going from one day working in media to this field, I actually thought after 10 years at CNN, I thought, well, I felt a little bit burnt out. Um, and I always tell this, wherever you are, I always tell folks this, is you always raise your hand, right? I want to work on a story. I want to work on a story. I want to work on a story. The day you stop raising your hand is the day it's time to leave. And I knew at CNN there was a point where we'd have, a president there, and I wouldn't want to stay for the show because I was just tired. I think I was burnt out. I would never thought that transitioning, to strategic communications, I thought, and crisis PR, I thought I'd take a little break. And it's not much of a break at all. But I really love that I get to work with people and still work with the media and help people in similar ways and tell their story, right? You still get to work with the media. You still get to do this. And this is not something that they always teach you. This is something that, you learn from working with really, really, really smart, good people that you admire and who bring you up, and people who want to help you, and um, always always respect you as well, and people who respect my opinion when I'm 30 years old and this is my opinion and they respect my opinion. And I've worked with some incredible, incredible people like that. And I think having a mentor is really important to everyone.
Thank you. Do you think, like, in general, if we're not talking about this communications, like strategic communications field specifically, but anybody who wants to be successful in any line of work, it's important to have a mentor or someone who supports you, or you kind of can do everything on your own.
No, nobody can do anything on their own. You want to have, sometimes it's having several people around you, right? You always want to have people who help you grow. And you want to, I think I found that in my, now, after doing this a while, I think it's my turn to give back and, mentor other people as well. And that's something that I think, is important for everyone as they learn, as they grow, as they get better. And it's something I would want my own children to have some really good mentors.
Thank you. And the last question that I have is, what is one piece of advice you would give to our listeners if they want to improve their communication skills?
Messages, practice your messaging. Um, one of the things we say with communication skills, you always have to have a message, right? Three key messages. That's it. Practice, 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 right? I mean, it's just the basics of communication, right? Always be transparent, acknowledge, listen, show empathy, and don't get defensive. I think that's really, really important. But like working on it, going out there, practicing your messages, and putting yourself in places you're not necessarily comfortable with, right? There are people who don't feel comfortable talking in a big audience, but do that. Put yourself in places that you're uncomfortable, and you'd be surprised to see what happens.
Exactly. I can relate to this so much because like every time I put myself in a very not even like very uncomfortable, but a little bit uncomfortable situation, something great always happens, even if it's not right away. But then when I look back, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I did it.
Yeah,
Eleanor,
absolutely.
thank you so much for your time. I know you have a very busy schedule with your clients, especially with everything what's happening in the world right now.
Oh,
I,
yes.
it's very difficult, and I greatly appreciate your story and all the great tips you so kindly shared with the audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karina. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the time.